Talk about fossil fuels. I'm splitting energy into 2 weeks. We're going to do fossil fuels this week. The beginning of next week, we'll do nuclear power because I think it kind of needs its own day. And then we'll get into the renewable kinds of energy like wind and water and solar and stuff like that next week. Speaking of which, a renewable energy source means that more of it is going to form within our lifetime, or that it can replenish itself. So, like solar energy, not going anywhere within our lifetime. The sun's not going to leave. Same thing with wind. Water power is more like the flow of water. We use that. Biomass and things like trees can be renewable if you grow them correctly. Like if you knock down a whole forest, that's not renewable because there's no way that forest is ever going to grow back. A non-renewable energy means that there's only so much there and we can use it all and run out. Something like coal, oil, and gas, they will regenerate eventually because the earth is always making more as long as there's fossils dying. But that takes like millions of years. So in our lifetime, we're not going to get any new coal, oil, or gas. We'd have to wait a million years and we'll all be dead by then. So it's non-renewable because in our lifetime it's going to run out. The most popular fuels are oil, coal, and natural gas throughout the world. Now, then these numbers are from 2015, but the numbers haven't changed all that much since then. The renewable energies are definitely pushing their way in. There's things like electric cars, more wind power. People are putting solar panels on their house, stuff like that. But if you look worldwide at every person in the world, still most energy is coming from coal, oil, and natural gas. So what is a fossil fuel? It's called that because fossils, like dinosaur fossils, and fossil fuels kind of start from the same place. We had a previously living thing that fell on the ground, got covered up by rocks, and it might have become a fossil, like what you see in museums, or it might become a fossil fuel. But either way, they come from living things. They are full of hydrocarbons, which are molecules that have a lot of hydrogen and carbon, hence the name. Some of them have other atoms in there, as you can see, but the thing that we care about is the carbon. So the more carbon it has, the better it's going to burn, the more energy we're going to get from it. And the more it's going to pollute the air, but we'll get to that later. Coal! So what exactly is coal? It is a rock, a fossil fuel, and coal is made from more than 50% fossilized plants. How do we get it out of the ground? Well, coal mines. It can be a strip mine, like that bottom picture, if the coal is close to the surface. It could be an underground mine where we have to dig a whole bunch of shafts and things, go underneath to get the coal. But either way, it's a mine, which comes with pros and cons like we just talked about with mines last week. How do we use coal? In the United States, most electric power plants are burning coal. We can also use coal to do things like make metals. As you know, you have to heat up metals really, really hot to get them to bend into different shapes. And coal burns very hot, so it's easy to make a very hot coal fire and use it to shape metal into different things. If you've ever seen the videos from like when steel first became a thing, and you see like those big factories where they would burn all the steel and pour it into the shapes and all that, that's coal that they're burning. We can also use coal byproducts for some other things. Later this week, you're going to do a whole worksheet about coal and where it comes from and how do we get it and what are the pollutions and all that. We'll see more about that later. But types of coal. Anthracite coal is the best one you want to find. It is hard to find, but it burns the best, gives you the most heat because it's mostly carbon. So you can find it great. But the most abundant one on Earth is the bituminous coal, which doesn't have quite as much carbon, but it's still pretty good. Subbituminous coal is a little bit less carbon, and lignite has the least amount of carbon and the lowest energy content. So the more carbon the coal has, the hotter it's going to burn, the more energy you're going to get from it, and so it's the more desirable kind. But you can see the best kind of coal is also one of the hardest to find. Pros and cons, obviously you don't have to write all of them, just pick a couple from each one. Like 2 or 3 is fine for your notes, whichever ones you like. Coal is easy to find. It's relatively inexpensive to get out of the ground. It's reliable in that every time you burn coal, it's going to make heat. So every time you burn anthracite coal, you're going to get certain amounts of heat. It's great. We've been doing it for a very long time, so we know how to find it. We know that it causes pollution, and we can try to clean it up, but it doesn't always work very well. We're trying. There's a lot of jobs and companies that are built around coal and getting coal out and burning coal. So there's a lot of people that rely on it for their jobs and their companies. The not great parts of coal, obviously pollution. It's not green. It's not, even if we try to clean up the pollution or prevent pollution, it's still there. Something still gets through. We're just trying to kind of limit it. So it's not perfect in terms of not creating pollution. There's no way we can make coal that doesn't pollute something. The gases that are released when you burn coal contribute to air pollution and acid rain and global warming and all kinds of stuff like that. If your country needs coal, but you don't have any, well, then you're going to have to ask another country for some coal, which means you have to depend on that country. When we are mining for coal, that destroys habitats, biodiversity, lots of things. There can be accidents, there can be mine collapses, lots of things. It's a lot better now than it was like 100 years ago, but coal can still be very dangerous to mine out of the ground. Oil. So what exactly is oil? Still a fossil fuel, but this time it came from marine organisms. So millions of years ago, there was an ocean. Living things lived in that ocean. They died, became fossil fuels. And in today's world, it's not an ocean anymore. There are rocks there now, because you know the earth changes over time. Usually we find oil in between rocks that are called shale. Now sometimes we can get lucky and there's a big bunch of oil just sitting down in that shale, and as soon as you hit that spot, it just pops right out of the ground. Like those videos you see of oil shooting out of the ground. That's if you get lucky and find a little pool of oil sitting down there. But in the 2000s, we're kind of running out of those areas, so now we have to kind of force the oil out, but we can still get it out in some places. You basically take a big old drill, stick it down on the ground, force the oil out. What do we use oil for? Mostly cars, gasoline. It's also for like jet fuel and diesel fuel, all comes from oil. There's some places that use oil as heating, and we can also use it for other products like plastics. We'll see more about that in a second. So an oil drill, what's going on there? It's similar, but not the same as if you think of like a hand drill. If you want to like drill something into a piece of wood, it's kind of like the same idea, but bigger. You take a big old drill bit. This thing is like 3 feet wide. It's huge. Drill it down into the ground. As it drills down in, we slide down metal pipes and then cement around the outside of those pipes. And the purpose of that is once we actually hit the oil or natural gas, because we'll see they're in the same place. When you actually hit that, that pipe is supposed to prevent it from leaking into other places. So it just comes back up that same pipe. Once you hit the oil, if you get that kind that just flows back out, well, then you hit it and it's going to flow back up the pipe and you can collect it and send it to a refinery. If it's in that kind of rock that's holding on to it and we can't really get it to flow, then we have to do something else that we'll see. I'll show you in a second with natural gas. So what do we do once we get it out of the ground? We send it to a refinery. What does the refinery do? Makes it really hot, separates it, and then converts it into different kinds of fuels. So the crude oil that you get out of the ground can't really do very much. Once you get to the refinery, they heat it up really hot and separate it based on boiling points. I have a picture coming in a minute. That'll make different sorts of fuels. Like it'll separate based on the things that boil hotter versus not so hot. Then they can separate those out, turn them into different products, and store them and send them off. here we go. The heavier ones would be like gas and fuel oil are down here. Diesel, jet fuel, kerosene are kind of in the middle. Up toward the top, you see like butane, propane, things like that. Those butane and propane are things like you can burn on a gas grill. They're lighter boiling points. So when you heat up this oil, it'll separate, and the heavier boiling points will sink down. The lighter ones will float kind of on top, and then you can separate them out and store them that way, depending on what's going to go where and what it's going to be used for. Pros and cons of oil. Again, we've been doing it for a very long time. We have whole infrastructures built around it. So we have ways we know how to get it out of the ground. We know how to manufacture it. There's whole job industries around it. It is reliable in that it will always burn. Gasoline will always work no matter where you get it from. We can use it to make other things that are not just gases like plastics. The cons of oil, obviously air pollution, acid rain, greenhouse effect, pollutions. Yeah. If we are drilling in the ocean, which is increasingly becoming more common because we've kind of tapped out all the easy to get to oil on the land in some countries. So instead, we're going to go out into the ocean because there's also oil under there. Well, if that pipe tends to leak in an ocean, now you've just polluted that entire ocean, which is what we're going to see later on this week. We'll talk about oil spills and what happens with them. We know it is only a finite resource, just like coal. If you need some, but your country doesn't have any, then you have to depend on other prices, other countries, which can cause wars, and not great. The burning of all of these, coal, oil, and gas, can cause health problems, environmental problems. If you have oil leaks, like what happened in the Gulf of Mexico in the 2010s, that BP oil spill can kill off the whole environment. Yeah. Gas. Natural gas. It is mostly methane, and there are some other gases in there too. You usually find natural gas right next to oil deposits, so sometimes companies can get lucky and find both, like gas and oil right together. Now, until pretty recently, whenever that gas would escape, we were trying to get to the oil. We didn't care about the gas. So we would just let the gas escape. We'd set it on fire. It would burn off, whatever. We don't care. Well, within the last 50-ish years or so, people have been like, well, why don't we collect that gas? Why don't we take that and then use that as a fuel? So once we figured out the technology for how to capture that gas and transport it safely, now we can use natural gas. One way that we can get gas and also oil is by fracking or hydraulic fracturing, which I'll explain in a second. That's usually how we get natural gas and oil now in the United States. So we've tapped out all those easy to find places. But sometimes, in some areas, you can get lucky and find just a place where there's oil and natural gas and you just drill into it and it comes right up. Natural gas is used mostly for heating, cooking, electricity. If you have a gas stove at home, that's natural gas. Sometimes heating implements work by natural gas. We can store it in some places and pump it into your home, things like that. Fracking. Fracking is used when there is oil and gas in the rocks way underground, but it's kind of stuck. And they call that tight rock, meaning that the oil and gas are really, really stuck in there. So if we just drilled into it, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to go anywhere. So what they do after they drill the hole the same way they drill it for like an oil rig, they shoot down this fracking fluid, which is mostly water, but also some chemicals. And basically they shoot it down so fast with such high pressure that it just blasts apart that rock under the ground. And when it does that, it frees up the gas and oil that are in that rock. It basically just exploded the rock. And then it can flow to the surface, and we can collect it and go on about everything else with refining it. There are some issues with fracking. We're going to read an article about it later. There are some companies that got a little too excited about fracking and didn't stop to think if it was going to be safe. So, More about that in a couple of days. Natural gas. Just like all the others, we've been doing it for a while. We know how it works. We know how to get it. We know that there's some of it still left. Natural gas is actually cleaner than the other fossil fuels. It doesn't create as many pollutants. Still makes some, but not as much as like coal or oil. Obviously, it's a gas, so it's not like it can leak out or pollute things in the ground or water like oil and coal can. It can still pollute the air, though. We already had a whole infrastructure around oil, so now we have a whole thing about natural gas, companies, jobs, etc. This is especially becoming an issue in Pennsylvania because we found there's a whole bunch of shale underneath parts of Pennsylvania and New York, kind of like this whole area, where if we could just get out that gas and oil, if we can use fracking, then you can make a lot of money off of that. There's some people selling their land to fracking companies so that they can make money from it. Still, we are burning this, so cons of it: greenhouse gas, global warming, air pollution. You're seeing the same thing over and over again. They all kind of have the same cons. The mining of it destroys habitats and biodiversity. Fracking has its own set of problems that we'll see another day. Natural gas leaks are really hard to detect because the natural gas doesn't have a smell. You can't see it and you can't smell it, so how would you know when it's leaking? If you do have a gas stove or furnace and you've smelled, it does have a smell, but that's because the companies put something in it to make it smell. So that way, if you have a gas leak in your house, you can smell it and be like, oh crap, that's gas. But if you just take it straight out of the ground, you don't know. So it can be dangerous, both for the environment and for the people, because that stuff can get set on fire. Global demand for fossil fuels. See, it's not going anywhere. Especially coal and oil, not going anywhere. And gas is getting more popular as we go. Who's using the most fossil fuels? This is as of 2019. Some data takes a while to get in. United States, Australia, Europe, makes sense. The up-and-coming places would be like China, India. They are starting to consume a lot more of it. And China found it has a whole lot of coal underneath it. So things are getting going there too. Besides pollution and all that stuff, the global issue with fossil fuels is that they are not evenly distributed across the world. The largest coal areas in the world are USA, Russia, China, Australia, and India. Largest oil and natural gas, because remember they're found together. That's Saudi Arabia, Russia, USA, Iran. You see what countries you don't see in those lists? Like all of Europe, most of Asia, most of the Americas, all of Africa. So all of those countries that don't have these fuels have to pay other countries to get it. And if you want to get real political, you should look up what was the real reason behind the United States going to war in the 2000s in Iraq. And it was about 9/11, but not really. It was more because they have oil. Onward, though. When you do have fossil fuels, there are jobs that are created and there's money that's made. And it's really hard to argue with a area that has coal, oil, or gas and tell them, well, don't do that because it's going to pollute the area. They don't care. They're making money and supporting their families. They just want to do what they can to live. They don't care that it's polluting things. So it's really hard to get people to care about it when that's the only thing they can do to make money. Countries that don't have fossil fuels have to import them. And most of the money that's made goes to that company, not to a government. So this is more of there are some national conflict issues going on, but it's more about companies choosing what's going to be spent where and where they're going to drill and things like that. So the future, and then we're done. We are, at least in the United States, Europe, some parts like that, starting to transition to more renewable energies. There are individual people who realize that it's better to have like solar panels on your house or to some energy companies will send you a letter and say, would you prefer to use renewable energy and pay like 10% more or whatever. So there's people who can choose that. You can buy electric cars. The issue is fossil fuels still give us way more energy. So like the amount of energy you can get from coal or oil or gas is way more than the amount of energy you can get from a solar panel. Especially when you're talking about countries, like the entire United States overall can do much better energy-wise with fossil fuels. So that non-renewable energy is always going to do better until it catches up, the technology for renewable energy catches up. There are some things that we just can't stop using it for right now. Like there's a lot of cars that still can't use electric. Electric cars might be too expensive. Some of the companies might not change for one reason or another. So until the technology for renewable energy catches up, we're still going to need fossil fuels. If we keep using them at their current rate, we're going to run out pretty soon, by 2060. You guys will probably still be alive by then. I maybe won't be, but still, you can see it's not going to last much longer. We've really got to get the fossil fuels under control here. That's that. We'll see more about each kind throughout this week, and we'll see the nuclear and renewable energies next week. So until then, let me know if you have any questions.